Welcome to Montessori Musings webinar on inclusive classrooms. Earlier in the summer, we have explored some ideas about inclusive classrooms and have pointed to the many diverse aspects of what we understand by an inclusive classroom. But tonight's webinar, which has been so well attended by so many different people from around the world, we will focus specifically on inclusive classroom, which addresses gender and sexuality. We have got 3 guests who all contributed towards the MOOC course on gender and sexuality, which they called the inclusive classroom, and they will engage in a conversation about these topics. Some of these topics may not be easy for all of us to hear, but I urge you to please stay and engage and definitely look at the MOOC when they finish, because they have got wisdom, they have got commitment, but many, many, many stories and many aspects, what it all means for us as early as practitioners. So please stay mute if you can. And I hand over to Hannah, Sarah, and Sid to talk and share their stories. Over to you guys.
Thank you. Well, first of all, we wanted to thank you, Montessori Musings, for letting us come and be a part of your wonderful webinar series. My name is Hannah Bainham. I'm a Montessori teacher educator at Montessori Center International, and I love children. And I love children in all shapes and forms, and I love working with children, and now I love working with teachers. I'm constantly inspired by teachers, especially new teachers who are just in the beginning of their Montessori journey. And I really am very passionate about creating a classroom that is for everybody, not just gender normative, not just the stereotypical, the sexualities that we consider. I'm thinking about the classroom of the future, but also the classroom of the present. And I had the pleasure of working with 3 people on the screen and one other person who wasn't able to make it today, Sarah and Sid, who helped me create this, and Terry, who helped me create this webinar on this MOOC, this massive online learning course about creating an inclusive classroom. For me, I think it's important for us to share stories. I see stories as resources. I approached this webinar, I approached this course by looking at the feminist pedagogies and how we value voices as resources. And so this short course is really about highlighting the voices within the community. And I myself am a cisgender ally. And so therefore, I think it's very important to really listen and highlight the voices of my other 2 peers here, Sid and Sarah. I wanted to start off with a question, which I think, again, is very interesting and it's very personal to me, is thinking about the journey that you've had with gender and sexuality. So to share your journey with gender and sexuality. I myself, I was born and raised in India, which has some very traditional ideas about gender. And that definitely shaped and defined who I was. And I've had a lot of struggles throughout my life thinking about gender and thinking about sexuality and thinking about what is acceptable and what is something that you should share and what is personal. I also grew up in a very Christian household with very traditional values of sexuality. I was told at a young age that marriage was for a man and a woman, and that you shouldn't have sex before marriage, and that if I did, I would go to hell. And if I had any kind of other thoughts about these things, I would go to hell and the people around me would go to hell. I grew up with a lot of fear about gender, about who I was as a female and who I was as a woman and who I was as a little girl, mostly as a little girl. I grew up with a lot of fear for my safety, a lot of fear for being too loud or too short, too tall, or being taller than men, or not fitting into the stereotypes. I grew up with a lot of fear of for others. At a young age, I had family members and young friends who were who identified as queer and spent a lot of time in hiding and weren't able to express themselves and weren't able to express themselves to their parents, their families, especially not the school that I went to. And it really made me think about spending life hiding your identity and hiding who you truly are. And that's not something that I want for any child, to be able to not be their true authentic selves. And I think that this is really highlighted in Sarah and Sid's stories. So Sarah, I'd like to ask you a little bit, if you could share a little bit about your journey with gender and sexuality with us.
Sure. Hannah, I just want to, what you said was really touching, and I want to thank you for being such an ally and for the ability at a young age to see beyond your own perspective. That's a huge part of why we do the work that we do. For me, I grew up in Cape Town, South Africa, and at a really young age, I felt so alone and so misunderstood, and I knew that I wasn't the same as everyone else. I didn't have the same feelings that most girls had for boys, and I wasn't allowed to talk about it. I knew that there were other people like me in Cape Town, but I heard people saying such negative things about those people. And so that was really hard for me. Throughout my teenage years, I just felt like so misunderstood and so alone and so angry that I couldn't be who I really wanted to be. My parents had gay friends, but they were the friends and they were not family members, and it was fine as long as it was not in our house. And so just growing up, I just felt such loneliness, and almost as if no one could ever understand who I was, which I know most teenagers go through once your hormones are going. It's those feelings, these visceral feelings of being alone and feeling this dark cloud surrounding me. It's those feelings that propel me to do the work. And as I came up, when I was 18, I moved to the States, and I had such anger and such this ferocious drive to not ever feel ashamed of who I was and to not ever let people feel that way, because people kill themselves. I hate to bring us down, but the bottom line is people kill themselves because they don't feel seen. They cannot be who they truly are. And so this fight and this drive has made me who I am. And quickly, before I talk too much, I was recently meeting with a bunch of Montessorians, queer Montessorians, and I had this epiphany that if I wasn't queer, I wouldn't be who I am, and I wouldn't be as loud and vibrant. And even though I had such a tumultuous, lonely childhood, I am so thankful that I have the ability to speak and change minds and listen and learn. And I just want to thank everyone for being here and for taking the time to listen. And so Sid, your story is so important too.
Mine started in similar sort of experience of being marginalized and othered and not feeling heard, not feeling seen. I know as a 4-year-old child, I had feelings for other boys. I did not have the understanding or the language to make sense of what I was feeling and experiencing. But over time, I realized that what I was unacceptable. I still remember my mom taking me aside when I was 10 or 11 and telling me how being gay was bad and sinful. And there was this general sort of sense of disgust that, you know, in relation to being gay and being queer. And it was so intense that people around me wouldn't even utter the word. You know, that's how bad it was in the Kerala context, where, you know, even the word for gay was not uttered. It was almost like they said, they used the word, oh, he is that, you know, he's that thing. That's how they described people who were gay. And so that shame and that, you know, sense of disgust was internalized as a result of seeing this sort of way of, you know, talking about queer people. But I mean, recently I came across this sort of notion that the idea that you know, coming to the West wasn't really, how do I put it? Seeing the fact that being gay in the West isn't fully what it seems to be. That quite often we forget that heteronormativity and the gender binary that you see in non-Western countries were imposed as a result of colonization. And even when you look into the history of India, you find that there were laws that were passed by the British, you know, colonial government that criminalized and marginalized, you know, queer gay people as well as heteros, who are third gender sort of communities in India. So I think it's also important to think about the fact that the West isn't fully, you know, innocent in this, because the West has produced this sort of a narrative, produced this world, this colonial world, where certain expressions are unacceptable. Anyway, I just thought it was important to contextualize that. But it took me 20 plus years to come to terms with being queer. And that happened as a result of being around people who normalized and celebrated, you know, queerness. And that sort of allyship that you spoke about, Hannah, and the kind of support and love that I've received from Barbara and others, you know, it's such a huge part in, you know, in blossoming as a person, you know, in fully being content in who I am. So that's been my short journey.
Thank you. I heard recently a conversation with some friends about often we ask, you know, when did you know you were gay? And I think that that's quite an outdated statement. He actually told me, when did I accept I was gay? And I think that is such a beautiful way of looking at it, that idea of accepting and knowing, and being okay with it. And I think that that's, and being okay with being your true self. And I thank you so much, Sid and Sarah. I've learned so much from your stories and thinking about that importance of gender and sexuality, and that how it is a journey and how it continues on. So Sarah, would you like to continue? Yeah.
You know, I just want to interrupt you, but not interrupt you, but say, you know, I can be completely at ease with who I am, and I am, but every time I meet someone, I have to reintroduce myself as a queer, non-binary human being. And every time, Sid, maybe you feel this, I don't know, there's like a catch in my throat as I'm about to say it. And I know I've described this, like my cheeks get red and I cannot fully breathe and I feel my heart pounding because I'm so nervous that that person is going to have a reaction that doesn't allow me to then fully be who I can be, whether it's in a school situation or I'm meeting someone at a party. And so just that's what you made me think about, that even though you can be fully comfortable with who you are, every day, there's National Coming Out Day, right? But National Coming Out Day is actually every day for queer people, and it's why we do the work. So I just went on that tangent. Gender and sexuality is so important to me. There's this huge myth that we shouldn't talk about it in early childhood years because children just don't know that they're gay. And if we're talking about it, we're going to turn them gay, or whatever we do that we're not going to do. But children know at a really young age whether the label they were assigned at birth fits them in their body. And I knew when I was 4, Sid knew when he was 4. At 13, I knew and I didn't fit in. At 27, when I began teaching in a Montessori school, I feel bad for the people that I was learning with, because I pushed and yelled and argued about feminism and about pronouns and about boxing little children in little squares. And then in my late 40s, I come to understand that I actually don't identify with the sex that I was assigned at birth. And that is still like rocking my world. And that is why it is essential, imperative to do the work from the moment a child is born, to read the books, to have the conversations, so that children can know that it is okay to be who they truly are, so that everyone can feel safe and seen and heard, so that when a child comes to you questioning their gender identity or their sexuality, you as a parent or a teacher or a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle can be there for them and be accepting. That's why the early years are it's just imperative for me. It's not even up for debate. You know, we as adults, we have so much fear, and we see this again and again. We're going to read a book to a child and the children don't mind, or a child comes in and they are no longer called by the name they were assigned when they were, that their parents gave for them. They're fine. Children are so flexible and fluid and easy. It's families who come, we come with our emotional baggage and our religion and our culture, and that's why we do the work, to peel back the layers and to examine our own prejudice and our bias. And I could go on for hours, but I'm not going to.
I mean, I think us as Montessorians, we know that the early years is such an important time in a child's life, right? It's where they're absorbing the culture around them. And if they're absorbing a culture that does not have gender and sexuality discussed, they're not absorbing a culture that might include them, right? And I think that this is so important when thinking about inclusion and creating that inclusive classroom. It's that ignorance or ignoring something, pretending it doesn't exist, is what leads to hate and discrimination, right? It's what leads to intolerance and fear. And actually, if children can see themselves or see their family members, or even if they're not even thinking about these things, if they can see themselves or see culture, they're able to accept it more, right? They're able to absorb it and understand and feel safe and have that understanding, which I think is really important. Sid, I know you're very passionate about gender and sexualities and in early years, and why do you think it's important?
I think for me, the simple answer is LGBTQIA plus children and adults exist, and they matter, and they are worthy of being celebrated. Like, Sarah and as well as you, Hannah, said, no child or, adult should have to hide or be ashamed of any part of their identity. But also, like me, children may not have the language or they may not fully understand all that they're feeling and experiencing as a child. They may not have the vocabulary for it, but that doesn't mean that they aren't actively forging connections and making sense of their world, you know, and they sense if they're accepted or if they sense they're not accepted in the world. So I think, I mean, the simple answer is really that, you know, LGBTQIA plus children matter, and they need to be celebrated. Another aspect that I often think about is that I find it problematic that inclusion often ends up being a tick box exercise. You know, I think we want to create spaces that are truly inclusive, and if that is the case, that we need to think about how we can constantly engage in amplifying and in serving the child who is in front of us. And for this to happen, I mean, we must be able to see the various aspects of a person's identity, of a child's identity, instead of looking at it from a singular point of view. I think this is where the aspect of intersectionality comes, and how you know, our identities are not ever singular. We are lots of different things. You know, we are like, I'm queer, I'm South Asian, and I'm male, and all these things inflect and shape you know, who I am. So in this regard, I was just wondering, Sarah, what your thoughts were on how your various marginalized identities and unmarginalized identities, you know, shape the way you are in your work and in early years.
Thanks, Sid. I love the piece that you said about giving children the language and the voice is so important, because we just don't do that enough. So I wanted to thank you for saying that, and like that sparked a million thoughts for me. A huge, other than being a queer, non-binary human, I'm also an African and a white African, and a person who grew up in South Africa during apartheid has had such an impact on who I am as a white African. And I bring that with me. And when I meet people, they're just, there's such a thing as a white African. So that's a part of who I am, in addition to being queer and then being Jewish. And having had family members in the concentration camps is another piece of the puzzle that makes me me. And so when I work with children who are 3 to 6, I'm always trying to remember to be developmentally appropriate and to not push my stuff on them, but to represent the world as the best way that I can as a white African, and to lead with questions and lead with books that make these particular children right now in northeastern Florida, to make them see beyond their white perspective and the privilege that they carry. And what I'm doing is to listen and learn and to take courses and to just be more aware of all the privilege that I bring and the need that I have to listen and learn, because I've so far to go. And so do the children that I teach right now. There's so much to unpack and undo and unlearn. And then there's this potential for this beautiful blossoming, which is why we do this, right? And the bottom line is to work with children to empower all of them, not just the ones that look like me, but every single child. I don't know if that answers your question, but.
It does, it totally does. And I mean, I feel this more and more in my own life, where I feel I'm not able to compartmentalize my identity, because, you know, all these different aspects shape and inflect each other. And the way that I experience the world is through those different, you know, how they interact with each other almost. But I also feel that these identities are not always static. I find that there are some aspects of our identity that glow and intensify in certain contexts, while in others, you know, they're not as intense, like when I go to India, you know, I mean, my race is not as much of a intensity as it is in the UK, you know, but my queerness is way more, you know, made visible,
Right.
where I have to hide that aspect of mine. So for me, you know, this is really important that that this sort of intersectional sort of views, you know, is available to us to think with, because the way, for instance, the way I perform my queerness and my maleness is also shaped by my race. And I have found that you know, I don't always have the same kind of fluidity in expressing my queerness as possibly a white queer person has the, you know, potential to do. But another aspect that I was thinking about was as a male in early years, you know, quite often being queer and being a male can make you hypervisible. And there's also this sort of discourse, a sort of um, a feeling of suspicion that looms around you. You know, people wonder why are you working in early years? You know, what is, you must have some sort of ulterior motive in wanting to work with children. So I've had to almost perform my queerness and perform being male in normative ways in order to avoid being seen as a threat to children. And of course, you know, all of this is linked to the age-old, you know, notion that gay and queer and trans folks are unsafe to be around children. So
Yeah.
that trope is quite strong in with any marginalized sort of group, I think.
Do you know what that just made me think lately? So I moved to Northeastern Florida, and people like to say Miss around here a lot, and they're not comfortable with using the first name. I go by Sarah. Oh, my bow tie just did a thing. Anyway, I go by Sarah, and this year I've been having so many interesting conversations with children because they all call me Miss, and I keep saying my name is Sarah. And last week they were like, well, why aren't you Miss? And so I had to explain that I don't feel like a girl all the time, and I don't feel like a boy all the time, and I'm actually in the middle. And it was so hard to explain to them in ways that I thought, I don't even know if they got it, but, and it's obviously not just a one-time conversation, but I wear bow ties, I wear ties, I don't wear skirts, I have short hair, and it's still so hard to present this part of myself to children. I'm still trying to figure it out. Now I'm just going on and on, but I feel what you're saying as a white human in the best way that I can. And children just accept it and move on. And I'm left here like shuffling through. Did I say the right thing? Did I say the wrong thing? How do I do it? Like, it's just always something to work on.
And I think this is really highlighted in the course. It's that idea that it's the work that we have to do as educators, right? It's not the work that we have to do for the children and force them to have, oh, we have to celebrate this, we have to celebrate that, we've got to make them do things. It's actually our journey and how our journey will affect and reflect and give a voice to children. And I think that creating that inclusive classroom, being that inclusive adult takes work, and it takes time, and you have to think about the words, you have to think about how you may just generally say, okay, the girls line up here and the boys line up here. Just a small little comment like that can be polarizing, cannot, you know, can identify, can highlight a gender in a way that we don't want to do, right? So thinking about our words and apologizing when we get it wrong and really doing the work. And I think that's what I hope the course will allow teachers and educators to do. Anything else that you want to say, Sid or Sarah, about your journey or the importance or or anything, or should we talk a little bit more? Yeah, Sid.
I was just going to say about the course and what we, what the course speaks to me and what I hope that the course does in terms of, what it conveys to the people who are participating in it. And I mean, like how Sarah started off, and how you started off, Hannah, what I value the most in the course are the stories, the personal stories of those who, engage in the course, not only of those LGBTQIA plus, communities who participated, but also the allies and how they recount their journeys of coming to become allies. I see each of these stories as building blocks with which we can create worlds. And the moment I feel the moment we stop to create the static sort of structure, we start being exclusionary. We start, the building becomes so static that it's not able to become flexible with the emergent needs of the children and the adults in the classroom. So for me, the continual sort of responsiveness to the stories of people that we are with is a critical part of practice. But also what I hope that the course does is that it instills a spirit of that responsiveness to the child that will acknowledge the richness of the child's knowing and their world, but also create a space that is safe for playfulness and experimentation with their identities, which quite often is, goes unspoken, that we can actually experiment with the way we are as individuals. I wonder what each of you thought about that.
Sid, you're so eloquent, and I just love that about you. I was reading through the comments this morning on the MOOC, and somebody wrote that they wouldn't be a cisgender female would not be comfortable wearing men's clothes, and I wrote, like, it's such a shame that clothing is gendered. Imagine a world where you could wake up and wear anything you want and you are comfortable and those around you are comfortable. And for me, I think that's what I want people who take the MOOC, who participate in the MOOC to evolve their practice as humans and to examine, like really examine the biases and prejudices and the little fleeting thoughts that go through your head, not with guilt and not with shame, but to just reflect on them and to come out the other side. If you can, if you cannot, that's okay. Eventually you'll get there. But to be there for the children and the families and the educators who don't fit the little boxes. Like, that's my goal, is to just be more accepting of everyone else.
Thank you, Sarah. I think that really highlights what we hope that this course will do. One of the strongest, there were so many beautiful voices throughout the course, and the course kind of took a shape of its own. And I feel it's unique in that way because it really champions the voice. Like I said before, it uses voice as a resource. One voice that really stood out to me was Deanne's voice when she was talking about what beauty was and what beauty was as a child, what she thought beauty was, right? And that idea of, I mean, even I remember that. To me, beautiful was a blonde girl, or because I grew up in India, was a woman with long black hair, and I really wanted that, and I didn't look like that, and I didn't have that way to fit in, and I used to dress up my brother, and you'll see a picture in the MOOC actually. I used to dress up my brother as the bride because he had blonde hair and I had brown hair, and so I dress up as the groom because I just thought you have to be blonde in order to get married, right? But Dan really talks about what it was like to grow up as a Black girl in America, and again, that intersectionality, that experience of what beauty was, and the pain of not seeing herself in literature, in books, in storybooks, of not seeing herself as someone worthy to be there, right? And I think that when we think about our classrooms, are we representing the children in our classrooms, but are we representing the world, right? It's that windows or mirrors, right? Are we opening them up to the world, right? I think as Montessorians, we're very passionate about that idea of cosmic education, of respect for all and peace, and really giving the child the world to become a citizen of the world, right? To become a citizen of the world, you have to be inclusive. You have to understand that there are differences, but the differences are what makes us stronger. And that's what I really hope that this MOOC the course will highlight these voices. And me as an ally, I really have had the time to just sit and listen and realize that I have learned so much from you, Sid, and you, Sarah, and Terry. I have learned so much just from our conversations of listening, right? And putting it together was magical. And what I love is it will evolve, and you can add your resources in the sections. If you come up with something interesting, anyone who's signed up to the course can also add their own resources there. It will change, it will evolve, it will grow into something that's really beautiful and free, and something that people can come back and visit at any time. And this is really a gift that we are giving to the children out there, right? Because they deserve action from all of us, and that's all we can hope there. Thank you. Barbara, would you like to?
Yes, thank you very much. So many thoughts have gone through my head as you have started to speak. Only today, my granddaughter asked me, Granny, when you were a teacher, how did people call you? Suddenly this question has come out. So she's looking for another identity in me as a person. She knows me as a granny, but I'm also the teacher. I'm also part of the community. And I think that sharing this message with parents will be very, very important for them to be able to see their child in the very many facets, in the myriads of features that makes a human being. And then we can really see each child for who they are, rather than a little formula. I must admit that I have been trained at a time when we were told that we must wear skirts, because how otherwise will the children know that we are girls? So you can imagine that in the 35 years that I have been a Montessori teacher, I have made a long journey, but very recently I have been moved by the story of a child not fitting into a community and having to be somebody else in order to fit in. And I would implore all of you to please allow children to be who they are. And to be able to do that, each one of us has to make a long journey in order to be truly accepting of the children in our communities. And for that reason, do engage with the MOOC. There are many layers, there are many aspects of the course. For myself, I looked at it for the first time yesterday, and I will see it in a different way when I look at it again. This is a resource for many, many more weeks to come, and to be shared with as many people as you can. And I'm delighted that the idea of making the open learning free for the Montessori community has started a long time ago when I worked for MCI, and I am proud to see that it is blossoming into something really worthy of the Montessori name. I would like to thank everybody who worked on the MOOC, because there were many people who got involved, and they have had to give many personal stories. Giving a personal story is very different to giving the story, I am a Montessori teacher. And with that, I hope you will reflect about your many facets and what you can give to the children. Thank you for joining us, and thank you very much for creating the course. Thank you.